What do a white desk, a car dealership, and a half-eaten chicken sandwich have in common? More than I ever realized. Because looking back, those ordinary moments quietly taught me how to trust myself again. So if you've got a few minutes, have a seat beside me on the porch swing because I want to tell you a story all about it. Hey there, welcome to Mama Drama and Trauma. I'm Jenny, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. I want to ask you something. Have you ever gotten to a place where you questioned yourself so much that even the smallest decisions felt overwhelming? After my marriage ended, I replayed everything. Conversations, memories, decisions. I wondered what I'd missed, whether I should have seen the signs sooner, and whether I could trust my own judgment ever again. What I didn't realize at the time was that rebuilding my life wasn't just about healing from heartbreak. It was about learning to trust myself again. Today, I want to tell you about a desk, a car dealership, and a lesson that took me much longer to learn than I ever expected. The desk where everything felt wrong. When I close my eyes and think back to that season, I'm sitting at my desk. The sun is pouring through the soft aqua curtains beside me, making the room feel brighter than I do. Everything around me is white. White cabinets, white desk, white drawers. The little tree outside the window sways in the breeze, its deep red leaves catching the afternoon sunlight. Maisie is curled up at my feet like she always is, and somewhere in the background, I can hear the little robot vacuum bump into a wall before turning itself around and heading in another direction. From where I'm sitting, I can see the front door, the dining room, and the windows looking out into the front yard. Looking back now, it's a peaceful room. Back then, it didn't feel peaceful at all. It was the Saturday after I found out my husband was having an affair. The boys were spending the night with his mom and stepdad, and my husband had come over to take apart the basketball hoop because it had been damaged, and the trash company was going to pick it up. I heard the garage door open. A few seconds later, he walked through the doorway and appeared in the entryway between my office and the dining room. I remember looking up from my desk. I wanted to look at him, but I just couldn't. He looked exactly the same. Same face, same voice, same man I'd been married to for 22 years. But it didn't feel like I knew him anymore. It's hard to explain unless you've lived it. It felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. We weren't talking about the affair. We weren't talking about our marriage. We were talking about QuickBooks. I had just updated the software for our business, and I remember asking him what he wanted to do about passwords and logins. I didn't know if I was still going to be handling the bookkeeping. I didn't know if the business was still going to be ours. I didn't know what anything was going to look like anymore. Looking back, I don't think I was really asking about passwords. I was trying to understand what my future was going to be. After that day, I spent countless mornings sitting at that same desk. I'd get the boys off to school, empty the dishwasher, straighten up the house, pour myself a cup of coffee, and sit down, hoping work would distract me from everything that was happening. It never really did. I'd open an invoice and stare at it. Body shop, contractor, subcontractor. The numbers were right there in front of me. I'd entered invoices exactly the same way for more than 20 years. It was second nature. Except now, I'd type the wrong number into the computer, delete it, try again. then realize I'd entered another one wrong. I'd spend forever trying to figure out why something wouldn't balance, only to discover I'd made another mistake. Then I'd have to retrace my steps, looking through invoices, bank records, and the register, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I remember leaning back in my chair so many times, frustrated with myself. Why can't I get my shit together? What is wrong with me? I'd done this work every day for over 20 years. Why did something so familiar suddenly feel so impossible? I knew I wasn't sleeping. I knew I was under an unbelievable amount of stress, but I still thought there was something wrong with me. I had no idea I was grieving. Looking back now, I understand something that the woman sitting at that desk couldn't possibly have understood. There wasn't anything wrong with her. Her brain wasn't broken. It was trying to carry the weight of a life that had fallen apart while still expecting itself to function like it always had. Heartbreak doesn't pause your responsibilities. The invoices still have to be entered. The bills still have to be paid. The house still has to be cleaned. Your kids still need dinner. Life keeps moving even when your heart is begging for the world to stop for just a little while. When I think about that office now, I don't remember the paperwork. I don't remember the numbers. I remember the woman sitting in that chair. She believed her life was over. She couldn't imagine feeling normal again. She couldn't imagine trusting herself again. If I could walk back into that room today, I'd sit down beside her and simply remind her. There was never anything wrong with you. You weren't failing. You were surviving something you never wanted to survive. The dealership. A week after my husband left, I remember getting in my van and driving to the dealership. I truly wasn't planning on buying a car that day. Earlier that morning, I'd been talking with my sister-in-law. She knew how much I was struggling, and she finally said, "Just go look. You don't have to buy anything. Just go look." So that's what I decided to do. The whole drive there, I kept giving myself the same little pep talk. You're just looking. You don't have to buy anything. You're just going to see what's out there. When I pulled into the dealership parking lot, I put the van in park and just sat there for a minute with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath. "You're okay," I told myself. "Just go inside." I opened the door and walked into the showroom. A salesman greeted me, and I explained that I was just there to look. My husband was out of town working, and I wanted to see what they had. He smiled and said, "No problem." We talked for a few minutes about the kind of vehicle I was interested in, and then he said he wanted to show me one they had out on the back lot. We climbed into one of those little electric golf carts. I can still hear the quiet hum of that little electric motor as we drove across the dealership lot. The August sun beat down on the black asphalt, and you could almost see the heat rising off the pavement in waves. He stopped beside a sporty model that he thought I'd love. I climbed inside, looked around for a minute, and smiled politely. It just wasn't me. I didn't even need to drive it. He laughed and said, "I think I've got another one you'll like better." We climbed back into the golf cart, and a minute later, he pulled up beside a black SUV. Before I even got inside, something about it caught my attention. I opened the driver's door and settled into the seat. This one felt different. We headed out for a test drive. As we drove, he started showing me all the things this SUV could do that I'd never had before. Apple CarPlay, the display that projected my speed right onto the windshield so I didn't have to take my eyes off the road. Then he showed me the feature where the engine automatically shuts off when you're stopped at a light. I remember telling him, "I don't think I'm going to like that." He laughed and said, "Here's the trick." He showed me that if I didn't press the brake pedal quite all the way down, the engine wouldn't shut off. I remember thinking that was pretty clever. He asked what kind of music I liked and found a station that reminded me of a local station called the Arch. Then he opened the sunroof. The warm August air filled the SUV as we drove down one of the quieter back roads. For just a few minutes, everything felt lighter. I remember thinking, am I really doing this? Not because I was driving the SUV, but because I knew what usually came after a test drive. If I kept saying yes, I might actually buy it. When we got back to the dealership, we parked the SUV, and while we were sitting there, he started showing me how everything worked. He connected my phone to Apple CarPlay and Bluetooth. I hadn't decided to buy the SUV. We hadn't agreed on a price. He was simply showing me the features. Then he smiled and said, "Call Jenny's husband." Before I even realized what was happening, the SUV started calling him. My stomach dropped. Wait, what? Oh no. Then my husband answered. The salesman laughed and said, "Hey, your wife's up here buying a new car." He was just joking. He thought my husband already knew I was there. He thought we were just another married couple out looking at vehicles together. He had absolutely no idea what was happening behind the scenes. I remember feeling completely caught off guard. I quickly said, "Okay, I'll call you back." Then I ended the call. The salesman just kept smiling and showing me more features on the SUV. He never knew that one innocent joke had just turned my stomach inside out. A few minutes later, we walked back inside. He sat down at his computer and started running numbers. I honestly wasn't expecting them to make sense. He offered me more for my van than I thought he would. We had reward points we could use toward a GM vehicle, and for the first time all afternoon, this trip that was only supposed to be about looking suddenly felt very real. I told him I needed a few minutes. I walked back outside, climbed into my van, and called my husband. I tried explaining that I hadn't gone there planning to buy anything. I had only gone to look. He was upset, not because I wanted a new vehicle, but because I hadn't talked to him about it first. The thing was, a few days earlier, we'd actually had that conversation. We'd been standing in our kitchen, and I'd finally told him what I'd been saying for a couple of years. "It's my turn," I said. "We've talked about me getting a new vehicle for years." He looked at me and said, "Well then, go buy yourself a car." The thing is, I don't think he ever believed I actually would. I think he said it because he never imagined I'd walk into a dealership by myself and actually buy one without him. But after I'd gone to the dealership, suddenly the story changed. He told me he'd never said, "Go buy yourself a car." He said what he'd meant was, "We'll go buy a car." But I remember that conversation so clearly. Looking back now, I realized something I couldn't quite put into words then. I remember feeling guilty because I hadn't talked to him before going to look at cars, but he hadn't talked to me before making decisions that completely changed our family's life forever. Somehow, I still felt like I was the one who had something to explain. When I hung up the phone, I just sat there for a minute. Oh shit. Then I took another deep breath, got out of my van, and walked back inside. When it came time to sign the paperwork, I walked into the finance office. It wasn't a big room, just a desk, a couple of chairs, and a stack of papers waiting for signatures. The finance manager started walking me through everything one page at a time. Then we got to the extended warranty. I remember thinking about how expensive cars had become. Everything was computerized now. What if something breaks? What if I'm on my own? What if I can't afford to fix it? So I checked the box. I wanted to know that no matter what happened, I'd be okay. Then we got to the title. The finance manager asked whose name I wanted on it. I remember sitting there for a second. Just a week earlier, I wouldn't have even thought about that question. Of course, it would have had both of our names, but this time, I only put mine. Not because I'd given up on my marriage, I hadn't. A part of me still hoped we'd work things out. I remember thinking, if he comes home, I can always add his name later. But if he doesn't, I didn't want to have to untangle one more thing. Looking back now, that was one of the first practical decisions I made for my own future. I wasn't closing the door on my marriage. I was quietly preparing myself in case it closed on its own. I drove home in my old van that afternoon because I still needed to clean everything out before trading it in the next day. I remember pulling into my driveway feeling proud of myself, not because I'd bought a new vehicle, because I'd walked into a dealership completely by myself for the first time in my life. The next day, the boys came with me to trade in the van. We were excited about the new SUV. At the same time, it was a little bittersweet saying goodbye to the van we'd driven for years. That van had carried our family through baseball, basketball, hockey, and football games, school drop-offs, vacations, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. It wasn't just a vehicle. It held pieces of our life. Looking back now, I understand that day differently than I did then. At the time, I thought I had gone to a dealership to look at cars. I thought I was simply trying to get through another impossible week. What I couldn't see then was that every decision I made that day was quietly shifting my focus. For so long, my thoughts had been about saving my marriage. That afternoon, without even realizing it, I made one of my first decisions based on making sure I would be okay. I wasn't trying to become independent. I was simply beginning to protect the woman who would have to live with whatever came next. The food court. A couple of weeks later, I remember taking the boys' school shopping before classes started. We ended up at the St. Louis Premium Outlets. The food court was actually pretty quiet that day. There really weren't many people in there. The four of us found one of those little tables. Carson sat beside me. Ryan and Kaya sat across from us. The kids ordered lunch from Charlie's Cheesesteaks. I didn't order anything. By then, it had been almost 2 weeks since I'd found out about the affair, and I still wasn't eating. It wasn't because I was trying not to, I just couldn't. Food had become something I knew I needed to do, but every time I tried, my stomach felt like it had completely shut down. Ryan ate about half of his buffalo chicken sandwich before pushing the tray away. "I don't really like it," he said. I remember pulling his tray toward me. I picked off a couple pieces of chicken, a few onions, a banana pepper, maybe 2 bites altogether. That was all I could manage. Even those few bites didn't sit very well because I'd gone so long without really eating. Then my phone lit up. It was my husband. The second I saw his name, my heart started racing. He wasn't the one calling me back then. I was always the one calling him. So the moment I saw his name on my phone, one thought immediately crossed my mind. Maybe I answered while we were still sitting at the table. Then I quietly stood up and walked over near one of the entrances to the food court so the kids wouldn't have to listen to the conversation. He asked what we were doing. I told him we were out school shopping. That was it. Just an ordinary conversation. We talked the way we talked 100 times before. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal again. There wasn't an apology. He didn't say he was coming home. Nothing about the conversation should have changed everything. But somehow, it did. When I walked back to the table, nothing around me had changed. Carson was still sitting beside my empty chair. Ryan and Kaya were still across from me. His half-eaten sandwich was still sitting there. The food court was still quiet, but something inside me felt different. For the first time in days, I had hope. Just hearing his voice, just hearing him ask what we were doing, made me believe maybe he was starting to realize what he'd walked away from. Maybe he missed us. Maybe he was thinking about coming home. Hope walked back to the table with me that afternoon. I really believed maybe he was coming home. Looking back now, I wish I could sit beside the woman at that table. I'd tell her it's okay to hope. Hope isn't something to be ashamed of. When you've loved someone for 22 years and built a family together, of course you're going to hope. I'd let her have that hope. But I'd also gently tell her something she couldn't understand yet. One day, she wouldn't need someone else's choices to decide whether she could smile again. Little by little, looking back now, I don't think there was one day when I suddenly woke up and trusted myself again. It happened so slowly that I didn't even realize it was happening. It wasn't one big, brave decision. It was 100 little ones, and each one quietly reminded me that I could take care of myself. One afternoon, my mom was over and we were sitting in the living room talking. I was venting because I was so aggravated. It wasn't even about the affair anymore. What I couldn't get past was that after everything that had happened, he still thought he had the right to control what happened at my house. I'd had a flooring company come out to give me an estimate because we'd talked about replacing the floors for years, but never did it. Instead of calling me if he had a problem with it, he called the company and yelled at them. The same thing happened with the window company. I remember sitting there thinking, just call me. If you're upset with me, call me. Don't call people who are just trying to do their job. I was embarrassed more than anything. Those companies hadn't done anything wrong, and now they were caught in the middle of something that had nothing to do with them. I remember looking at my mom and saying how frustrated I was, and then something inside me just snapped. I said, "You know what?" and got up to find the little screwdriver that fit the Ring doorbell. Of course, it wasn't a regular screwdriver. It had to be that tiny special one, and I remember digging through drawers until I finally found it. I walked outside, closed the front door behind me, and pulled up a YouTube video because I'd never taken a Ring doorbell off before. Maisie stayed inside, watching me through the little sidelight window beside the front door, her head tilted like she was trying to figure out what I was doing. Once I watched the video, it was actually pretty simple. I took the little screws out, carried the doorbell back inside, set it on the table in the entryway, and just stood there for a second. I remember feeling relieved, not because I'd taken down a doorbell, but because I'd taken away his window into my everyday life. If he didn't want to live here anymore, then he didn't get to know who came to my house or what projects I decided to do. People could knock on the door, and if I heard them, I heard them, and if I didn't, I didn't. I'd figure that part out later. But I wasn't going to leave that camera hanging there so someone who chose to leave could still try to control what happened inside the home he'd walked away from. It's funny because if you had asked me back then if my husband was controlling, I would have said, No, absolutely not. I never would have described him that way. But sitting here telling the story today, I realize there were little ways he tried to hold on to control that I never noticed while I was living it. I don't say that out of anger. It's just something I can see now that I couldn't see then. Around that same time, I started changing the house. We had painted it years earlier in colors we'd chosen together, but I wanted something different. I wanted the whole house to feel lighter, so I had almost the entire main floor painted a soft gray. The dining room, which had been a deep red, suddenly felt open and bright. I replaced the heavy curtains with lighter ones that let the sunshine pour in. In my bedroom, I took down the pictures of us together, the sign above the bed about love, and the decorations we'd picked out as a couple. I remember walking through Hobby Lobby looking for things that felt like me instead of us. I bought new bedding, hung new pictures, and slowly turned that room into a place that felt peaceful again. At the time, I thought I was just redecorating. Looking back now, I think I was trying to let more light into my life. That Christmas, I finally bought the boys new TVs. I'd been saying for at least 2 or 3 years that they needed them, but somehow it never happened. This time, I didn't ask what anyone thought. I simply bought them. I remember telling their dad not to buy TVs for his house because the boys could take their old ones there. It seems like such a small thing now, but it wasn't really about televisions. It was one more decision I made because I believed it was the right one, not because someone else approved of it. By the time mediation came around, something else had changed too. We were all sitting around the same conference table we'd sat around before. The mediator was at the head of the table. I was sitting beside my attorney, and she had a younger attorney with her who was learning. Across from us sat my husband and his attorney. I don't remember every word that was said that day, but I do remember one conversation about the parenting schedule. He kept bringing up how changing the schedule would affect his girlfriend, and I remember thinking, this isn't about your girlfriend. This is about our kids. Every time his attorney pushed back, I found myself answering right back. I wasn't trying to argue. I just wasn't backing down anymore. I was fighting for myself, and I was fighting for my boys. When we walked out that day, my attorney smiled and said, "I wish all my clients stood up for themselves the way you did." I don't think she realized how much those words meant to me. Just a few months earlier, I'd been sitting at my white desk wondering why I couldn't even trust myself to enter numbers into a computer. Now someone was telling me I'd stood up for myself. Maybe that's what learning to trust yourself again really looks like. It isn't one giant leap. It's 100 quiet decisions that almost don't seem important while you're making them. Then one day you look back and realize every one of those little moments was leading you right back to yourself. The porch swing. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I could walk back into that little office with the white desk. Not to change anything, not to warn her, not to tell her how the story ends. I'd simply walk in, pull up a chair beside that white desk, and sit with her for a while. I'd listen to the little robot vacuum humming across the floor. I'd watch Maisie laying faithfully at her feet. I'd look out the window at that little tree with the red leaves dancing in the sunlight, and I'd let her be sad. I wouldn't rush her. I wouldn't tell her to be strong. I wouldn't tell her everything happens for a reason. I'd just sit there with her. After a little while, I'd quietly say, "It's not always going to feel like this." And I already know what she'd say. She'd look at me and tell me, "You don't understand. You don't understand how much I love him. You don't understand how much of myself I gave to this marriage. It's never going to be okay. And the truth is, I'd let her say it because I remember believing every one of those words. I remember thinking there was no possible way my life could ever feel normal again. I remember believing that if my marriage ended, my life ended too. I just didn't know then what I know now. I know now that I was capable all along, not because I suddenly became stronger, because the strength was already there. I just couldn't see it underneath all the heartbreak. Today, trusting myself doesn't mean I never question anything. It doesn't mean I never make mistakes. It means I know I can make a decision and stand on it. I don't need someone else to approve of it before I believe it's the right one. I don't need someone else to validate what I already know in my heart. I trust myself because I've lived through the hardest season of my life, and I found my way through it. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but one quiet decision at a time. Maybe that's what trust really is. It's believing in yourself enough to know you can make the right decision for you without needing someone else's opinion or someone else's validation. Maybe I'll leave you with this question. What's one decision you've already made in your heart, but you're still waiting for someone else to approve? Maybe, just maybe, the person you've been waiting to trust is yourself. As I was writing this episode, I kept thinking about that woman sitting at the white desk. She truly believed her life was over. She couldn't imagine ever laughing again, trusting herself again, or feeling like herself again. Looking back now, I wish I could go sit beside her for just a little while. Not to change her story, because every part of it led me here. I'd simply remind her that the woman she's so afraid she's lost is still there. She's just waiting to be found again. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you're questioning yourself. Maybe you're waiting for someone else's approval before taking the next step. Or maybe you've forgotten that the person you've been searching for has been inside you all along. If this episode connected with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can always find me on social media at Momma Drama and Trauma, or send me a message through my website. Hearing your stories and knowing these conversations are helping you feel a little less alone truly means the world to me. And if you're looking for a place to keep reflecting, I hope you'll come join me over at the Porch Swing. It's a space I'm creating for women who want to slow down, share stories, reflect, and continue healing together. There will be guided reflections, journal prompts, conversations, and monthly resources, all created with the hope that you'll feel seen, supported, and reminded that you don't have to figure everything out alone. I'm so excited to share it with you, and I can't wait to welcome you there. Because after all, reflection is where healing begins. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.